My name is Naomi. I'm a subject support librarian at UE. Before working in libraries, I had a background in healthcare, working in the NHS as a healthcare assistant, then dietetic assistant, before managing to secure a graduate traineeship position and enter into the world of information management. While studying, I've worked within higher education and healthcare libraries in both unqualified and qualified positions, and part of what makes library work so appealing to me is the sheer variety of different aspects of a job that you can make your focus. And as I'm still relatively new to the profession, I'm still learning where I should really put that focus. But one of the key elements of librarianship that I'm particularly passionate about, and a topic I chose to centre my dissertation on, is that of the promotion of inclusive and diverse practice within the information management and library sector, and supporting underrepresented groups in terms of both staff and service users, with a particular focus on race and racial inequalities.
Hi, I'm Naomi Smith. I'm a subject librarian at University of West London. Last year I completed my library masters at UCL, but a few years prior I completed a masters in race and resistance at the University of Leeds. And this master's really introduced me to critical theory such as critical race theory, key thinkers like Foucault, and that's why my passion is within how to truly decolonize the library, how to truly decolonize our assumptions and our values that are embedded within UK higher education and academic librarianship within this context. And that's why I will be arguing at LILAC that we really need to incorporate critical theory.
Hello, my name is Kristabelle Williams. I am a librarian working in a secondary school in South East London. I am the School Library Association School Librarian of the Year 2021, and my work is very much focused on developing students' reading for pleasure, literacy and information literacy.
Hello everyone, my name is Tom Peach and I'm an Academic Services Manager at York St John University. I worked as a library assistant and later librarian in further education before starting my library masters, which I finally completed in 2019. While studying, I moved into an academic liaison librarian trainee role. I progressed through that into a full contract working in that role until I took my current role, where I manage an amazing team of academic librarians, digital training and assistive technology tutors, and study and maths development tutors. In my work, I've long been interested in disability justice and queer visibility in libraries and information literacy teaching. And since my current work now sees me moving between and amongst a variety of learning development theories and approaches, I've become keenly interested in the practice of information literacy and its relationships to digital and academic literacies, to maths competency and anxiety, and to accessibility and disability justice.
Many of the key barriers to information literacy instruction reflect the barriers to career progression within librarianship as a whole. And one of the key themes often identified here is the lack of mentorship opportunities or the lack of support from management teams to allow staff to pursue said mentorship opportunities and really develop those skills and the confidence needed to contextualize information instruction to specific roles, whether that's in qualified or unqualified positions. And anecdotally, there's also an over-reliance on internal recruitment over bringing in new perspectives, and this can really lead to an organisational culture of we've always done it like this. And this kind of echo chamber thinking can result in what effective information literacy instruction actually is and what priority it should be given, remaining unchallenged within your organisation. So this lack of specific support from leadership figures who are more experienced in delivering effective information literacy instruction, along with those wider organisational barriers, can really prevent potential instructors from getting involved before they've even tried to get started.
So some of the barriers I feel there are to information literacy instruction in schools is the structure of school and schooling itself, the pedagogy as well as physical and systemic. Is information literacy instruction happening in schools, and if so, in what ways? There is varying understanding, definition and prioritisation of infolit in schools by the profession, teachers and school management, and the government via the examination system and the national curriculum. Michael Gove's tenure as Education Secretary and the reforms he implemented from 2010 were, in my view, very influential in terms of redirecting school curriculums towards what Frere described as the banking model of education, so focused on memorisation, facts regurgitation and high-stakes exams at the expense of inquiry-led learning and development of information literacy skills within subject teaching. So where we do find explicitly mentioned information literacy in the curriculum and taught is across subjects, some in computing, citizenship, subjects which can be dropped after year 9, some in PSHE and English, but there may not be an information literacy curriculum as such. There may be gaps in the delivery of skills and teachers not necessarily getting up-to-date training, if training at all. Further barriers come from others' perceptions and self-perceptions of the school librarian role, their responsibilities, lack of training, lack of opportunities for collaboration, advocacy for their role in teaching, workload pressure of solo working, i.e. managing the whole library service alone. And also the ratio of private school students to state school students taking, for example, the inquiry-based extended project qualification EPQ, which libraries can be very involved with, compared to the general ratio of those students, indicates there might be an issue with access to such courses and infolit learning for students depending on which schools they go to as well. So the type of school you work in can affect opportunities to get involved in infolit.
Like Naomi, I think some of the key barriers to particularly engaging with information literacy instruction as a new professional, or indeed a hopeful new professional, is how many of our libraries can structure and silo information literacy into a particular role, specifically most comfortably into the librarian role, which when it comes to job descriptions and it comes to roles, particularly as I experience in higher education, we anticipate the librarian arrives at a librarian job fully formed in their information literacy understanding, in their pedagogic and educational capabilities, which then means that there is a big distance to travel between other kinds of roles within libraries, particularly roles that many of us started in as library assistants, and without space within those roles to bring information literacy into those roles, to make it explicit, to bring the language of education, the language of pedagogy into those roles, we will continue to struggle with the distance created between those roles, which means that engaging with information literacy instruction and particularly getting those first professional jobs will continue to be really, really challenging.
Lack of diversity within libraries leads to a lack of diversity within collections, as viewpoints and perspectives in a team are far more limited than they could be. It also means that the library service are not held truly accountable, as nobody can challenge those assumptions and biases that can have an impact on selecting resources for reading lists, those literature search strategies, or the language used in training presentations, particularly around training for information literacy instruction. Drawing from my own experiences of working with students in both academic libraries and working with professional medical staff in healthcare libraries, it's really clear to see the impact of how ongoing colonial teaching practices in higher education impact the way that professionals deal with information, research, and evidence-based practice in their working lives, particularly within those medical settings. And the impact of this on the general public can be seen when you look at treatment disparities between white and ethnic minority patients, as well as any patients from disadvantaged backgrounds such as disabled patients, gender non-conforming patients. The list really does go on. And I'd just love to see the conversation on the impacts of colonial practices within education and ongoing workplace CPD elevated from academic thought exercise to more of a strategic priority within organisations.
The need for critical theory to be incorporated into our teaching practice, especially when it comes to information literacy, is really imperative. For example, how can we truly talk about decolonizing the library when information literacy actually centers white epistemology? And when I say epistemology, that's the ways in which we think. So in information literacy, it's the ways in which we think about information. For example, we teach students largely, well, I know personally that good quality information traditionally is seen as written, peer-reviewed information from well-known journals, from key authors. However, there's already a stumbling block from a critical perspective because we are centering on written forms of information, which are European forms of knowledge. In the indigenous culture, knowledge is predominantly oral. It's through stories passed by the elders to communities. So already, from a decolonial/critical perspective, already we are centering European, Eurocentric values. There are also more theoretical and ethical complications within critical information literacy. For example, telling people how to define information, what constitutes as trustworthy information, and what information they should not believe in is and can be quite problematic, especially when it's coming from the librarian's perspective. And we know that librarianship does have some tensions within the profession itself. It's a very privileged position. It's a predominantly white, middle-class position. So taking that into account, when we're teaching users, especially users who are not from these privileged positions, how to define information, there are problems. It doesn't take into account, for example, how race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, and other social and cultural factors shape the way we perceive information, what we believe in, even the dynamics of information. For example, last year there was a program on Channel 4 called Race and Medical Experiment, What's the Truth? And this program explored the historical abuses of medical experiments on Black and Asian people, predominantly in America. And this program then explained why so many people from these communities were more susceptible to not trusting the government when it came to COVID vaccination, because there was already this fear based on actual things that the government had done. So when we're teaching information literacy, we need to be incorporating these wider factors and really and truly understanding our users. I would argue to truly understand our users, we would need to be doing some form of investigation, whether it's some type of ethnographic study or some qualitative study. And of course, already you may be thinking, well, I don't have the time for that, which brings a key question. Can theory become practice within our jobs? Do we have the time for it? Is it possible? We need to ask the question, can critical theory be incorporated into our teaching practices? Whether it's possible, whether theory is accessible for everyone. I'm very aware that why I feel confident using theory is because I studied it for over a year. I'm very aware that other librarians don't have that privilege. Other students may not have that privilege, may find certain things difficult. I mean, personally, I've only just got round to even being able to pronounce epistemology, and a lot of the time I actually say it incorrectly. So, these are also things we need to be thinking about and things I hope we can at least create a discussion about.
What conversations I would like to see happen? Can we identify issues caused by and causing the fragmentary nature of the delivery and positioning of information literacy in the national curriculum? And to what extent can we develop and advocate for the school librarian role to address these? Should we be, as some schools are, working towards embedding ourselves into information literacy that is happening, or putting forward curriculum design and standalone instruction and training led by librarians? for information literacy in schools, perhaps as information literacy coordinators? Should we be lobbying for more explicit information literacy and inquiry in the national curriculum and in government policy? Or should we be, as I've heard one teacher say, subverting this banking model of education with our own strategies? And what might a government or state idea of information literacy instruction in schools look like? And we already have some idea from the recent online media literacy strategy they have released. Who decides what would be an information literate young person? How can young people have a voice and design in this? Do they have equality of access to this education? How are we approaching information literacy in our practice? And is it actually perpetuating misinformation, poor strategies and harm? And how accessible is training for school library staff and teachers? And what should it look like?
With my disability justice hat on, I'd like to see much more robust disability justice baked into information literacy theory and scholarship and into practice. Libraries are often operating as places of compliance with law, with policy, for instance, which often places disability as boundaried, as needing individual adjustment, as a specific team or a person's responsibility as other. What would it look like for disability to be liberated in our spaces and then centred and valued in our information literacy teaching? How robust is our profession in understanding disabled experiences of information so that our teaching includes their experiences of navigating information landscapes as one of many possible experiences and not outside the default? What would our theory look like if disabled people's information practices were valued as information literacy and not pushed into other kinds of technology literacies, as has been suggested to me before? How can we support colleagues to join these kinds of conversations?
When talking about information instruction and what constitutes as it being successful, there are really important bigger questions that should be asked, such as the points that have been covered by the others. But at its most basic level, pathways into information literacy instruction again somewhat reflect that of successful pathways into librarianship as a whole, speaking from that library perspective. There really should be a greater variety of routes into librarianship as a whole, such as more varieties of apprenticeships available to potential applicants, and apprenticeships are adequately financially compensated so that a more diverse spread of people can be introduced into the profession via that route, rather than people that are maybe being financially compensated by friends and relatives. More traineeship should also be available in a variety of different sectors across library work as a whole. Really, the focus should be on moving away from that more traditional teaching model into avenues of career entry that value the experiences of both current library workers and people from other backgrounds, such as teaching. And even within the information management master's qualification, with the module on information literacy, there should perhaps be less focus on the theoretical and more of the practical applications, and making it really clear as well that the existing models and tools for the delivery of information literacy instruction can and should be challenged.
So, what a successful pathway to information literacy instruction, what would it look like? Well, I firmly believe to solve a problem is to name it. So, like I said, we need to be talking about these Eurocentric assumptions that are embedded in information. We need to define information. And I remember doing my UCL Masters during the module, the information literacy module, there is actually no real fixed definition of what information is. I think kind of the one that most people are in agreement with is information is something that is linked to reality. Information is any difference that makes a difference to a conscious human mind. Although even that should show you that as librarians, we have little control over the psychological factors that will influence existing belief systems, existing emotions and cognition, which create this subjective information behavior. And as I've already said, wider issues, race, ethnicity, definitely play a part into existing belief systems, I would argue.
What I think a successful pathway to information literacy instruction in schools might look like. Information literacy training is needed either via a qualification or other routes, specifically for teaching info lit both academic related and pastoral related to children and young people, and for training other education workers, i.e. delivering CPD for teachers. But training is actually not required for this job, with many schools not making a qualification a requirement, and what specialisation in info lit in schools is available on qualifying courses for librarians. Involvement in information literacy instruction completely depends on the educational setting and expectations and requirements. For example, from my own research with the EPQ taught and supervisory elements and or curriculum co-design delivery, there is quite a bit of variation in how school librarians are involved. So pathways to information literacy instruction in schools, I feel, are either not there or not clear, opportunistic and often hard won. I'd like to see this as not the case. Ideally, I'd like to see librarians as a teaching role in every school with funded qualification routes, including information literacy instruction training.
The figure of the fully formed librarian that I mentioned earlier means that we have structural issues with pathways to information literacy instruction, coupled with the value of librarian teaching varying from institution to institution, employer to employer, and the lack of pedagogy teaching in UK librarianship masters programmes in general. How do we expect new professionals to arrive at information literacy teaching librarian roles fully formed, shaped by progressive info lit, by pedagogy, critical theory, disability justice and so on, without the infrastructure to progress there in the first place? Whilst being mindful of workloads, of appropriate pay and rejecting exploitation, we do have some opportunities to break teaching and learning, and therefore information literacy teaching, out of its bubble as librarian-only work to something where information literacy and pedagogy has importance for all library staff to engage with in some way across staff, student and patron learning journeys, in conjunction with more honest and critical conversations for those of us at management level regarding our recruitment practices. In so doing, we can support pedagogy and information literacy as shared languages that move through roles, that move through sectors, and shortens the gap that we created that new professionals can face.